Taking a deep breath in. Welcoming our YouTubers at home. Thank you for joining us. Once again, coming into this moment, we breathe in peace, we exhale love, honoring that only this moment exists. What happened before, what happened yesterday, what's going to happen after this moment, none of it exists as we breathe in and let go, fully entering right here, right now. So, the sermon topic, which will probably be different than what the title of this video will be, was Deep Aspiring to Cease World Suffering. And that's a ongoing topic in Buddhism, because a lot of it is about helping cease the suffering in the world. And so I wanted to write a sermon about how we here in Dunisha approach that. And this week's reflection is, quote, do we seek to momentarily feel better anytime we experience pain, or do we seek to fully understand the pain and help cease the suffering within self and others? So are we constantly looking to just momentarily take away the discomfort or the pain of the now? Or are we really digging in deep to get to the root of the suffering, to understand it, and through that understanding, deep healing occurs? And really what's fascinating about Dunisha and living peace, the spirituality that we teach here, is that everything that is taught within it is actually about healing the self, cultivating peace in the now, and helping alleviate suffering of others. Because a lot of our suffering, a lot of the pain in the world comes from the spilling over of our own pain, doesn't it? So whenever we're not at peace, we inevitably end up creating more non-peace in the world. And even when we are at peace, there's still some things that go on because just the way that relationships and interactions work. But it's not the same kind of causes to when we are unintentionally walking around like a chicken with, this is not a great analogy, I'm so sorry, but with its head not in its proper location. And it's just that spilling over of our neurosis, the spilling over of our unresolved core wounds, our unresolved the abuse that we may have experienced, or even just our daily stress, or even in the ways that we seek pleasure and we seek love, we seek success. And in that seeking, in that pleasure, even if it's maybe a positive, we may end up hurting people along the way because we're not in that deep mindfulness. So today we're going to really go deep into the tree of life, our symbol for Dunisha, the tree of life symbology, the roots, the trunk, and the branches. And I'm really excited for this talk today because this is, I believe, from what I wrote, this is the most depth as I've ever talked to this point. And a lot of this material is going to be in the next book, Living Earth. So buckle up. And that is why for our students at home, here, let me show them this one I wrote on mine. See, they're filling in the gaps. And so there's going to be a few things I'm going to have you guys write down, but a lot of it can just be your own notes as well. So let's take a breath and make this transition. So for the roots, next to the word root and its colon, I'm going to have you write down establishing ritual. Establishing ritual. And for those of you at home, you can kind of just create your own little piece of paper and follow along. So, and then underneath that in the blank space, you're going to write three things, just 3 bullet points: daily, lunar, and seasonal. Daily, lunar, and seasonal. And so we're just going to write these down quickly, and then I'm going to go over them in depth until we move on to the next segment. So the daily, what you're going to do next to that is cultivating mindfulness. Next to the lunar, you're going to put stimulating consciousness. And next to seasonal, you're going to put fostering community. Next to lunar is stimulating consciousness. And then seasonal is fostering community. And so those are the main nuggets, and then anything else I'm going to be sharing with you, you're welcome to fill in next to that before we move on to the trunk. So roots in general, imagine the tree of life. You have the deep roots, then you have the solid trunk, and then you have the branches that are almost like a parallel to the roots below, because as deep as the roots grow, the branches can grow just as high. So it's a beautiful polarity. But in establishing ritual, ritual is so important, especially daily rituals. And I already wrote a post that I shared online before this sermon started, but a lot of times all of us have routines, don't we? And I thought about this, I'm like, but what is the difference between ritual and routine? Sometimes they're thought of as synonyms, but in this they're quite different. Rituals can be routines, but not all routines are rituals, because rituals are done with touching the aliveness of the moment. Rituals, especially daily rituals, are about repeatedly coming into the moment, the sacredness, the aliveness of the now. Routines, on the other hand, all of us have routines in our lives, and who's ever just gone on autopilot through these routines? And it's not really a touching of the moment in the presence. It's more about just get the shit done and move on. You know, we might have busy mornings, especially parents have very busy mornings getting their kids ready for school, and then they have to get ready for work, and it just turns into this hectic fest. And many people have that. And just going from point A to point B, who's ever driven a car before? And how many of you have forgotten that you're driving and you're playing some movie reel in your mind about something, to where it's like, oh my gosh, I don't even remember driving that 30 minutes because I was so in my head. That is the autopilot that I'm talking about. Whereas cultivating daily rituals, even if it's just 30 minutes in the morning, even if it's just 5 minutes here and there throughout the day, grounds us. It reminds us and allows us to cultivate that mindfulness that then sets the foundation for the rest of our life. If you don't have these solid roots of mindfulness, it's going to be much harder to actually grow your trunk and then expand your branches, which you'll see why as we continue to grow. Now, the lunar, the new moons and the full moons. These are beautiful ceremony or ritual days that the earth naturally gives us. You don't need to believe in some kind of religion. It doesn't matter if you're an atheist or not. There's these natural cycles that occur each month that we can all honor. And the new moons are a beautiful time. And even if you're just setting your own intention for them, that's fine. But in Dunisha, we love to stimulate our consciousness. We love to think beyond ourselves during the lunar cycles. During the new moon, it's a time for self-reflection and a time for self-care. So think of that self. How many of us have maybe even gone a month, 2 months, 3 months, a whole year without even fully checking in with ourselves in a single day, or pampering ourselves, or treating ourselves, or really going within ourselves? So when you're following the lunar cycles and you know that that day is coming up, you're gonna sure as hell make time for it, versus putting on the back burner, and all of a sudden years passed and you're having a mental breakdown because you haven't had a single sabbatical. And so making sure that we're honoring that new moon lunar cycle as a ritual of mindfulness is very important to keep ourselves fresh and exciting, to keep ourselves frisky for life. And then the full moons, especially if you're not part of a community, or especially if you're in a family where there's division, the full moons are a time to put all that shit to the side and to come together either as a family unit or as a community, bringing your family into the community. And so when you have at least a monthly cycle, once a month, of showing up for community, showing up fully in presence with your family, even if there's division, that is a great time to practice the mindfulness. It's not a time to go to war with each other or bring out all difficult things. It's a time for suspending a lot of the unresolved emotions in that moment and just showing up for each other and spending time and partaking in a ritual. And after you do that for a while, you're going to notice that it is going to get easier to communicate, even if there is division in the family unit, or maybe you're struggling with finding your place in the community. But when we repeatedly return to that, on a monthly cycle, even if it's just once a month, you're creating, again, the foundation for the roots to thrive. And then finally, we have the seasonal. These are the solar cycles, primarily the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices. And these, especially in Dunisha communities, are the great celebrations when you have a very large community event, a large feast, a large gathering. And these are very important times to come together as well. Because has anyone ever not been part of a community? And it's interesting how you don't necessarily really feel supported by life. You know, you have your work, you might have your family, but there's not a greater focus involved beyond your own unit or beyond your own self. And so when you take the time to foster connection and community, it gets returned threefold, 3 times fold, 10 times fold, because you're establishing being part of a group of people who are all focusing on the same endeavor of peace. And so when you're checking in on a monthly basis during the full moons, and then the seasonal ceremonies of the equinoxes and solstices, and sometimes the midway points between them as well, what you're doing is you're establishing a beautiful support system. And so when life gets a bit rough, there is a greater unit that you can fall back on. And it's also a unit for inspiration, because when you're part of a community and you see people all struggling in the same way, while some people may have maybe one year they actually heal that suffering, and then you can go to them and you say, how the fuck did you do that? It's inspiring to see the stories of success around you. It's inspiring to have a teacher that you can talk to about anything and not worry about judgment and provide feedback for. No one does the work for you. There is no expectation there. No one is going to necessarily hold your hand or be that validating source of comfort for you, because that's not what this is. But what it is, it's a showcasing of embodying that we're all moving in the same direction together. It's very much a journey of equality rather than someone above another person. Does that make sense? And again, think of this as the roots under the tree. And so when you have your self-care practice, when you have your daily mindfulness, when you have your couple twice a month lunar rituals that you're stimulating your consciousness to really think beyond yourself, and then when you have your seasonal community parts to become part of, especially if you're not here every Sunday, or maybe you're in a different part of the country and there's not a Sunday thing that you can go to, but there might be a few people that you can gather with for full moons or seasonal celebrations. What you're doing is you're setting a foundation. Thich Nhat Hanh in the Plum Village, the Buddhist lineage there, they often say that even more important than a teacher is a community, to have brothers and sisters who are practicing alongside you to support you along the way. Teachers are great, but when you're actually surrounded by like-minded individuals who are all walking in the same direction, it's so much easier to continue walking when you stumble versus when you're alone and you just say, fuck it. Who's had that moment? But when you're surrounded by encouragement, it's a lot easier to keep going up that hill, keep going up that mountain, keep crossing that sea, isn't it? So very important. And we're going to get more to community later on in the branches. But this is just about stimulating, cultivating, fostering the mindfulness in self and the family units, and then the community that lays the foundation for the trunk then to grow. Let's take a breath. So we now move on to next the trunk word. You're going to go ahead and write down establishing practice. Establishing practice. And for many of you, this is going to be very familiar, because this is what living peace is all about. And so the 3 bullet points here are the 3 masteries for the first bullet point. So you're just going to write down 3 masteries for the first bullet point. For the second bullet point, you're going to write down the 3 illusions. And for the final bullet point, you're going to write down the 3 releasements. So the trunk is all about establishing our practice of the peace teachings. You have your foundation, But then it's time to now put into practice fully mastery of thought, mastery of impulse, mastery of emotion, the three masteries that Living Peace starts with. After you really get a solid base of those, then you move into the three illusions. Ignorance is an illusion, we seek understanding. Chaos is an illusion, we seek harmony. Duality is an illusion, we seek transcendence. And then the step after that, you work on the three releasements. Releasing attachment to the mundane world, releasing our attachment to what we believe, what we think we know, and releasing our attachment to who we think we are. When we try and practice these 3 bullet points, the Living Peace teachings, without a foundation of mindfulness, it becomes very, very difficult. Who's tried to just jump into the peace teachings from Living Peace, right? And if you don't have a solid foundation under you where you're checking in with yourself daily in your daily rituals, they just go in one ear out the other, right? The reactiveness is still there. The impulsiveness is still strong. The judgments, the self-criticisms are still very strong. Because what's fascinating about the 9 tenets that we just wrote down, the first one's mastery of thought. And to really be able to dive into mastery of thought, it helps having a daily ritual of mindfulness to slow the mind down enough to catch the stuff that's going on. And when you have a supportive, when you're focusing, working on healing the division in the family unit, when you have a supportive community and we're all exploring these teachings together, it becomes so much easier to develop that strong trunk. And I love the trunk analogy because think of trees during storms. Trunks are very stable and strong, aren't they? Yet they're also pliable. They're also flexible. So when the storms of life hit, what do? They are able to flow. And if they're unhealthy, they get a bit brittle, and that's when they snap. And so think about this. When we are living very circumstantial lives, that means that we're always attached to what's happening outside of ourselves, and it really damages us. And when we don't have a deep practice within ourselves, we become very brittle and hard. And so when life hits you really hard, you end up snapping and breaking. Who's had a mental breakdown before? Right? But when we're having the foundation and the rituals with our roots, and then we really keep the teachings alive every single day, when the strong gusts come at us, we're able to sway with them. And it's so much easier to respond and bounce back versus then resisting, because when we're not in our mindfulness, normally when hard things come our way, we resist. And resisting is the same way as if a tree could just push back at the wind, and it's a lose-lose situation. It's learning we have to flow with it. We have to mold with it. We have to be flexible yet strong. Emotionally strong, yet also emotionally flexible. Isn't that a beautiful analogy? And it becomes very easy to live life in that way and respond to life in that way when we're doing the root mindfulness and cultivating the teachings of the trunk. And I'm not going to really go into the 3 masteries, the 3 illusions, or the 3 releasements, because that literally is everything I teach in Living Peace, and I have given so many sermons on it. But just know that that is what the philosophy and the lifestyle is, actualizing that. And that's why we have a student program for people who really want to go deep into it and to show up weekly for one-on-ones, and then we bang all that stuff out with the teachings and have personalized life coaching feedback. It's quite delicious. But if that's not on the table for anyone right now, at least we have the Living Peace book that we can revisit, and we have a lot of these sermons now online. The branches. Now we move on to the branches. And this is establishing community. So think of the roots as more showing up for community. And now when we get to the branches, this is really teaching us how we establish it, how we embody it. So for branches, we write down establishing community. And the 3 bullet points are going to be canopy, the flowers, and the fruit. Canopy, flowers, and fruit for the 3 bullet points. So what I love, and for the canopy actually, before I jump into it, let's write this down. Canopy is going to be comfort, comma, ease. Comfort, comma, ease. Flowers are going to be fresh, comma, beauty. Fresh, comma, beauty. And the fruit is going to be nourish, comma, seeds of peace. Seeds of peace. So let's explain all those words now. So what I love about the canopy, so okay, let's back up just briefly. We have our strong foundation of the roots under us. And now we've just established a strong yet flexible trunk. So no matter what comes our way, we're able to be very responsive in a peaceful way, right? Now our branches are able to really grow and spread out. And a canopy is wonderful for providing shade for people. And so the shade that our peace practice shares is very comforting, and it creates ease for people around us. Have you ever been someone that's been a bit neurotic and upset perpetually? And when you're around people, it's like the opposite of comfort and ease. And have you ever established peace within yourself, even just for a short, hot minute, and people are around you and they feel comfortable and they feel at ease, and they might even feel more joy when they're in your presence? So what happens when you're living these teachings, you become a font of comfort, ease, and peace for people when they're around you. And you don't even have to say anything. It's just in your energy. And then we start to bloom flowers on our branches. And the flowers are representative of perspectives. We become individuals who share fresh, beautiful, and clarifying perspectives with our words, rather than a lot of us, when we're stuck in our mind, pretty much everything that comes out of our mouth is an opinion and a judgment. Who's been there? We're very opinionated and judgmental, and not in an uplifting or constructive way. Because you could certainly have opinions and you could certainly have judgments, and maybe they can be constructive. But most often we fall into the habit of it being quite negative and dimming. Negative meaning in a separating way rather than a unifying way. And so many of you kind of relate to that with Dunisha, Andrew, and myself, or if you've met Dunisha, Emma, or Dunisha, Angela-san. Those of us who've been wearing the robes for a while, anytime you interact with us, you really don't get opinions anymore from us. What you get from us is preferences, soft preferences, and perspectives of peace, perspectives of clarity. And even if you're having a shitty day, you notice that our response to you is always in alignment with the peace teachings. And that is the flowers of beauty. And Thich Nhat Hanh is really big on this, because him and his lineage and his teachings, no matter the travesties, no matter the tragedies, the pain, the violence going on the planet, they always help people come back to the beauty of the moment, and that there's always something there's always something beautiful to be focused upon, even if it is just your breath of aliveness in this moment. Because in the aliveness of this moment, that means that there's possibility, that there's hope for change, that there's benefit that can be achieved, even if it's amidst great chaos and violence. And that's coming from someone who's gone through 2 wars and seen his countrymen killed and imprisoned, and yet they still focus on the flowers of beauty. And so that's why in Dunisha we also kind of follow in sharing perspectives with the world that help unify, rather than perpetuate bias, perpetuate judgment, perpetuate judgment. And once we really grow strong on those flowers, sometimes we know flowers turn into fruit, don't they? They can evolve. And when we have the fruit on our branches, after living this way for so long with the roots, the trunk, the branches, the canopy, the flowers, finally the fruit starts to manifest. And this is what you can give to people. Because the canopy, you're just existing, providing shade, and people come to you. And it's just, you don't have to say or do anything. The flowers are perceptions. They might come in the flowering of your words, but the fruit is what you start to give people. And these are the teachings. You get to the point where you're embodying it so much that just being in your presence, and you're able to actually, kind of like what we're able to do, is you're actually able to provide more feedback. You're able to go into the world no matter what job that you're in, because no matter what job that you're in, you're most likely interacting with someone at some point, even if it's just online. And it manifests in the way that you live your life. What happens is these seeds of peace start to be implanted around you. Who's ever been to any of these sermons, even if you've maybe not resonated with it, sure enough, there's at least one seed of peace that was planted within you. And so what I love about the fruit is that it's all in the sharing, and this is how we cultivate community. We start showing up and establishing communities wherever we go. If Andrew and I had to go to a different part of the country, sure enough, we'd probably start another community, wouldn't we? And then the Dunisha Emma, who's still in Arizona, when I left, she started holding space for community as well. And so what ends up happening is that even when we start to move away, the seed of peace exists within us. And wherever we are planted, it starts to spread. Not in a creepy way. Because I was thinking of this too, and I love this quote if you want to write this down. Like a tree, we simply exist. Like a tree, we simply exist. Think about that for a moment. In Dunisha, we're not interested in forcing anything upon anyone, not even peace. We're not interested in forcing. And just like trees, when people come and receive their fruit, they're not judging who's picking the damn tree. They're not judging if it's an animal. And they're not sizing up who's worthy of it or not. They give freely their fruit. They give freely their beauty. They give freely their canopy. And in Dunisha, that is our perspective. It's not about going out of our way to try and force some reality onto someone else or argue with people. It's about existing. And no matter where you are, if you become a strong, pliable tree, anyone around you is going to receive benefit. And I wish Dunisha Emma was here to share how she's been working in prisons and in the health wards, and even just her presence in it is so different than most of the workers there, because she takes these teachings into it. And normally that would be a job that is so very draining for the mind, to be able to hold space for so many people struggling, and sometimes seeing the abuse that might happen to the patients, to the inmates. But because she takes in the flowers of Dunisha, the perspectives, she's able to embody that no matter what. And she's able to still cultivate joy, even in very dense vibrations. And so when we've been practicing for years, and we have our strong roots, we have our strong trunk, we have our ever expanding branches, no matter where we go, there is benefit. And it's not about trying to force teachings, trying to preach it till the cows come home. It's about embodying it. And that's why in the Living Peace Code, we start with peace, people embracing a conscious evolution. And then you conclude with peace, people embodying a conscious evolution. And we focus on embodying because how many of you have met people in certain religions, or even maybe they're just humanitarians and they could be an atheist, but they're preaching something. But they're doing it in a way where they're not actually embodying kindness. They're not embodying non-judgment. They're actually very aggressive in their approach. And it makes, when you leave their presence, it doesn't feel like a great thing. And so we worry less about preach, 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 preach. And we're worried more about how are we embodying this? And how are the people around us being impacted by our words, our choices, how we handle our stress, how we have emotional stability or non-emotional stability. And that right there becomes the greatest teaching. And then you're going to notice that people are going to say, hey, I've noticed you've been glowing with peace lately. What's that about? And when they ask, then that becomes a beautiful opening. Versus, hey, I see that you're kind of a hot mess lately, and XYZ. And again, it doesn't mean that we don't share living peace, we don't share Dunisha, but we're not doing it in an attached way. Because who's given like advice to someone and you get pissed off when they don't listen to you, right? That's not the most effective approach. But when you just naturally start embodying it, there is it's happened to many of my students who've been practicing for a long time. They start to receive compliments that they're glowing because that they're so at ease and they're so at peace, and everything that they share is uplifting, and it makes a big impact on the people around them. So do you see how these roots and the trunk and the branches all come together to help cultivate a community of peace? To help cultivate a self-healing practice that then allows us to continue to grow, expand, flower, and provide fruit for people, while also developing strong roots beneath us to remain grounded in the mindfulness of daily activity. When you have these three components together, that is how, in Dunisha, we cease to cause suffering upon the planet, and we help to alleviate suffering of the people around us. Taking care of our own suffering, we then help alleviate the suffering of those around us. Just by existing, really hear that. Just by existing, you help alleviate suffering on the planet. Just as trees existing help the pollution on the planet and provide clean air. But instead of providing oxygen and clean air, we're providing fresh perspective, peaceful action, peaceful activity, unifying community. Interesting, isn't it? So let's breathe that in. So I hope you all enjoyed our talk for today. I covered all the notes. But since we've received our 501c3 and we're officially a federally recognized church and even religion by the government, I thought it was more fitting to start talking a bit more about the Dunisha spirituality. Here at the Zen Cowboy, for most people, I mainly teach the living peace philosophy, not so much spirituality involved. But since we now have our 29 acres and next year we'll be actually building a church building or monastery, whatever you want to call it. We're not really attached to what to call it, but it's a gathering space for the church, for the religion, for the nonprofit, and this is what we're going to be teaching. And it's not a matter of anyone having to believe it or be atheist, be Dunisha, be any Judeo-Christian or Buddhist. It's just about, will these teachings provide benefit to your life? And if you feel that the answer is yes to you, then you can enjoy them. It's not about trying to force change anyone's mind, but it's about creating an environment, a monastery that people can come and receive consistency and a message that helps provide healing and helps provide peace. Isn't that cool? Isn't that?
Where?
2 miles from here.
Okay. When?
The when is to be determined as we go through some of the rezoning and the remodeling. But so far, it's all been green lights. So that's fantastic. Yeah. And so as always, down below are links for those of you at home if you'd like to donate and support our vision. It's not just a vision anymore. It's a literal physical mission. You know, we have the land. We have the 501c3, and that's where all our money is going towards. And so we're very excited for that. And so links are down below. You can PayPal, just a reoccurring or single donation. There's also Patreon. That's another way if you don't have PayPal. Let's take a breath. Thank you, thank you, thank you. And as always, actually I don't always say this, but if you enjoyed this video, please give a thumbs up and please feel free to share it or subscribe. That definitely helps me to know who's watching. It helps to know, it's a great way to help spread what we're teaching here. So thank you, and we'll see you next week.